The slap came before the insult. A sharp crack across her backside, loud enough to turn heads on the busy downtown street. "Damn, girl," one of the uniformed officers drawled, his laugh echoing. "If I knew the city had queens walking around like this, I'd have been patrolling this block all year." The other officer smirked, sipping his iced coffee. "Careful, man. You'll scare her off. She looks too classy for you anyway." The woman froze mid-step. Her name was Danielle Carter, and she wasn't some random passerby. She was the newly appointed chief of police, the first black woman to ever hold the role in their city. Today was supposed to be her quiet arrival, walking among the community, before stepping into headquarters to introduce herself to her officers. She wanted to feel the heartbeat of the streets before inheriting the responsibility of protecting them. But in that moment, all she felt was rage boiling beneath her calm expression. The officers didn't know who she was. They saw only what they wanted to see, a black woman in a tailored navy dress, walking alone. To them, she was nothing but an object, a target for their thirsty bravado. Danielle's heart hammered in her chest, but her face betrayed nothing. She turned her head slowly, locking eyes with the one who had touched her. The smirk on his lips told her everything she needed to know. He thought he was untouchable. A bystander, a young mother holding her son's hand, gasped audibly. She muttered, disgusting, under her breath, pulling her child away. But most of the crowd looked down, hurried along, choosing silence over confrontation. Danielle's jaw tightened. She had worked her entire career to earn this position, breaking through walls. That had been stacked against her since her first day at the academy. And here, on her very first morning as chief, two of her own officers had reduced her to prey. "Something wrong, sweetheart?" the second officer asked mockingly when she didn't reply. "Don't act shy now. We're just having a little fun." Danielle took a slow breath. The weight of the badge she carried, not pinned yet to her chest but sitting in her purse, suddenly felt heavier than ever. She thought of her late father, who used to tell her, "The hardest fight you'll ever face, baby girl, is the one where you're underestimated." And here it was, staring her in the face. She wanted to scream, to put them in their place right there in the street. But years of discipline told her to wait. Timing mattered. Power meant nothing if it wasn't wielded wisely. Instead, she gave them a smile so faint it was almost invisible. "You boys have no idea," she said softly, her voice carrying just enough steel to make the smirk falter. The first officer laughed again, mistaking her restraint for weakness. "Oh, I got a pretty good idea." But as Danielle walked past them, calm and measured, a storm brewed inside her. Because in less than 1 hour she would be standing on the podium at headquarters. And those very same men would be standing in the crowd, waiting to meet their new boss. They just didn't know yet that the woman they harassed, the woman they had humiliated, in front of strangers, was the one who would soon decide their fate. And Danielle? She was already thinking about exactly how she'd make them face what they'd done. The fluorescent lights of the precinct buzzed faintly as Danielle Carter stood in the hallway just outside the briefing room. She had changed into her uniform now, dark navy blues pressed crisp, her new badge pinned neatly to her chest. The weight of it was no longer symbolic. It was authority. Inside, officers murmured among themselves. Some were curious, others indifferent, and a few already skeptical. The department had never had a black woman at the helm, and Danielle knew some of these men carried doubts wrapped in prejudice. She had faced it her whole career, whispers about quotas, dismissive comments about her being too soft. What they didn't realize was that their underestimation had been her sharpening stone. And in that room sat the two officers from earlier. She had caught sight of them as she entered through the side door. They hadn't recognized her yet, too busy joking with their colleagues, too blind to connect. The woman they harassed on the street with the leader they were about to salute. Danielle closed her eyes for a second, steadying herself. Her father's words echoed again. "The fight is never fair, baby girl, but that don't mean you fight it any less fierce." The door opened, and the deputy mayor stepped in, clearing his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, officers, detectives, sergeants, today history is being made. It is my honor to introduce the new chief of police for this city, Chief Danielle Carter." The room fell silent as Danielle stepped forward, heels clicking against the linoleum floor. A ripple of surprise went through the ranks. Some eyebrows shot up, some jaws tightened, and a few hands clapped politely before the rest followed. But it was the look on their faces that Danielle noticed most. The two officers, their smiles evaporated, their bodies stiffening as recognition struck. One muttered something under his breath, and the other shifted uncomfortably in his chair. eyes darting away. Danielle didn't smile. She stood tall, her voice clear and commanding. "Good morning. I know some of you are wondering who I am, what I stand for, and what kind of leader I'll be. So let me tell you this much up front. This department is about to change. Accountability, respect, and integrity are not optional. They are the standard, and if you can't live up to that, then you can't wear this uniform." The room was heavy, her words sinking like stones in water. She watched the officers' reactions carefully, some nodding, some stone-faced, and some shifting nervously. Her gaze lingered deliberately on the two men from earlier. They avoided her eyes, but she didn't look away. She wanted them to feel the weight of her authority, the irony of their mistake, and the storm that was waiting just beyond the horizon. "Now," Danielle continued, her tone steady but sharp, "I didn't come here to make friends. I came here to make sure this department earns the trust of the people it serves. And that starts today." Silence. Then a scattered applause, louder this time, cautious but genuine. Danielle stepped back, allowing the deputy mayor to close the ceremony, but her mind was already moving. She had a choice: expose the officers immediately and risk chaos on day one, or wait, let them dig their own grave with their arrogance, then hold them accountable in a way that no one could deny. As the officers filed out, she caught a glimpse of the one who had slapped her. His face was pale, his jaw tight. The other leaned close to him, whispering something like, "We're screwed." Danielle didn't flinch. Instead, she turned away, a quiet fire burning in her chest. This wasn't over, not even close. And if those men thought a street corner was the last place they'd have to answer for what they did, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. Wait a second. Tell us where you are watching from in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Stories Abode for more stories like this. Danielle didn't have to wait long. By midweek, reports started landing on her desk, complaints from citizens about officers being rude, cutting corners, even intimidating people during routine stops. Two names appeared more than once: Officer Bradley Hunt and Officer Mark Doyle, the same men from that morning. She sat in her office late one night, the city lights flickering outside her window. A cup of cold coffee sat untouched at her elbow as she read through the reports. Each one was a reminder: what happened to her wasn't an isolated act of arrogance. It was a pattern, a sickness in the culture of the department she now led. The next day, she called for a surprise roll to call meeting. Every officer gathered in the briefing room, the atmosphere charged with unease. Danielle stood at the front, arms folded, her expression calm but unreadable. "Officers," she began, her voice sharp enough to cut the room in half. "This department has a reputation problem. The people we serve don't trust us, and trust isn't built with weapons or authority, it's built with respect. Without it, we're nothing more than bullies with badges." She let the silence stretch, her eyes sweeping across the room until they landed squarely on Bradley and Mark. Their faces betrayed flickers of discomfort, but they masked it with crossed arms and forced smirks. Danielle took a step closer, her heels echoing against the tile. "I want to share something that happened to me just a few days ago." The room shifted. Curiosity, unease. I was walking downtown in plain clothes, minding my business. Two officers in this department thought it was funny, thought it was acceptable, to slap me and humiliate me in front of the public they swore to protect. A ripple of shock went through the room. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Danielle raised a hand, silencing them instantly. They didn't know who I was. They didn't care. All they saw was a black woman walking alone. And to them, that meant target. Now the silence was different. Heavy, suffocating. The guilty officers stiffened, their bravado cracking under the weight of her words. Bradley's face turned beet red. Mark's lips pressed into a thin, nervous line. Danielle locked eyes with them. Those men are in this room, and I will not, I repeat, will not, tolerate that kind of behavior under my command. The entire department was frozen. Some officers shifted uncomfortably. Others glanced at the two men, realization dawning. Bradley finally spoke, his voice defensive, almost trembling. "Chief, we didn't know it was you." The words hung in the air like a confession. Danielle's jaw tightened, and she leaned forward, her voice low and fierce. "That's exactly the problem. You shouldn't need to know someone's title to treat them with respect. Every single person out there, the homeless, the rich, the young, the old, black, white, every one of them deserves better than what you gave me." Her words struck like thunder. A young officer in the back whispered, "Damn," under his breath. Others nodded subtly, as if the truth they had been afraid to voice had finally been spoken aloud. Danielle straightened, her voice carrying authority that could not be questioned. "Bradley Hunt, Mark Doyle. You're suspended effective immediately pending investigation. Badge and gun now." The room was dead silent as both men hesitated, faces pale with shame and fury. Slowly, reluctantly, they unpinned their badges, the metallic clink as they hit the desk echoing louder than any shout. Danielle looked around the room, her eyes fierce but steady. "This is your warning. This is your line in the sand. From this moment on, the culture of this department changes, or you will not be in it." The room remained still, the gravity of her words pressing down on everyone present. Bradley and Mark shuffled out, humiliated, their authority stripped bare. And for the first time since taking office, Danielle felt the tide begin to shift. But she also knew this was only the beginning, because one act of justice wasn't enough. The real test was whether she could rebuild an entire system, brick by brick, in a department where too many thought respect was optional. And that fight had only just begun. The fallout was immediate. Word spread fast, not just inside the department but out on the streets. For once, the community wasn't whispering about corruption or cover-ups. They were talking about a chief who stood her ground, a chief who called out her own officers publicly, without hiding behind polished press releases. Danielle didn't relish the attention. She wasn't chasing headlines. But as she walked through the neighborhoods the next week, something shifted. Shopkeepers nodded at her with cautious approval. Parents pulled their children a little closer, but this time it wasn't out of fear, it was respect. A young black woman outside a grocery store stopped her, voice trembling as she said, "Ma'am, thank you. I've seen too much out here, what you did. It gives me hope." Danielle smiled gently, laying a hand on the woman's shoulder. "It's just the beginning. Hold us accountable. Don't let me or anyone else forget why we wear this badge." Inside the precinct, the atmosphere was different too. Officers were quieter, more alert. Some were resentful, whispering about Chief Carter making examples. But others, especially the younger recruits, looked at her with a kind of newfound respect. They were seeing, maybe for the first time, that integrity wasn't just something you wrote on a mission statement. It had to be lived. A week later, Danielle called another meeting. This time, her tone was firm but steady, her words like stone laid into a foundation. "We can't erase the past, but we can build something new. This uniform doesn't make you better than the people you serve. It makes you responsible for them. If that's too heavy a burden for anyone here, I'll take your badge now. No shame in it. But no room for abuse either." The room was silent. Not the silence of defiance, but of reflection. Some nodded. Some stared down at their boots. But the weight of her message lingered, undeniable. Later that day, Danielle stood alone in her office, staring out at the city skyline. The same streets where she had been humiliated were now the ones she was sworn to protect and reform. She thought again of her father, of his warning about unfair fights. He was right. This battle wouldn't end with suspending 2 officers. It would stretch into years of pushing against a system resistant to change. But for the first time, Danielle felt something stir inside her chest. Not just anger, not just determination, hope. Because when Bradley and Mark walked out of that briefing room stripped of their power, it wasn't just a personal victory, it was a message. To the community, to the department, to anyone who still thought authority meant license. And the message was simple: respect is not optional. Humanity is not negotiable. Danielle Carter had taken her seat as chief, but more importantly, she had taken her stand, and the city, still scarred but listening, had finally begun to believe change was possible.